Good morning, everyone. It is now Thursday, the 23rd of February, and I am this morning reading chapter 19, starting at chapter 19 of Hope's Kiss. Here you go. Carrie took her time walking from the bus stop to her grandmother's house. Many a fairy tale portrayed the grandmother as the girl's best friend, but this was not the case with Carrie. Graham was super critical and unforgiving. Whenever Carrie had the need to ask for extra money, Graham demanded the expense be justified. It wasn't fair because this was, in fact, Carrie's own inheritance. It wasn't coming out of her grandmother's pocket. After the housekeeper let her in, she climbed the stairs, knocked on the door before entering her grandmother's studio. This was the brightest room in the house with windows around three walls, and a skylight filled most of the ceiling. There were several large unfinished paintings and three counters covered with bottles and tubes of paint and chemicals and brushes and claws. Grandmother shed a paint-stained apron and hugged Carrie. She pushed aside an errant lock of her gray hair and then said, "What's the first, it's written all over your face, and second, because I read the papers. I know your wife was arrested, and you need money because they shipped her south to be tried. Why do you always have to say wife like that, like it's a dirty word? And yes, I do need money to go there with her." "What do you mean? Why do I say it like that? She's a terrorist." I wasn't at all surprised. We all knew she was flaky anyway. Fine line between crazy and dangerous. "Anyway, Graham, I need money enough to fly there and hotel and meals and transportation. Can you make me a check for 2,000 maybe?" "That won't be enough. Everything's more expensive there. You'll need at least five to be safe, and use cabs wherever you can so you'll be safer." Carrie shook her head at this. Her gram was so hard on her at times, but then she would flip it over and be so protective. She was hard to stay annoyed with. She waited while her grandmother washed her hands, and they walked together down to the old woman's study. It was a dark, rich room filled with an antique mahogany desk, matching chairs, and a walnut bookcase filled with leather-bound volumes. After stashing the check in her bag, she hugged her father's mother and left. She walked to the bank with from her grandmother's, and while she was depositing the check, she wondered how long a paper trail it would take for permission to see MJ, and if she should wait until that was cleared before she scheduled her flight. The lawyer had told her he didn't know how long the process would take. She was coming in the door and she heard the phone. She dropped her groceries on the floor and scrambled to grab it up in case it was MJ. Breathlessly, on the fourth ring, she plucked it up and said, "Hello?" A man's voice answered, "Hi, Carrie, how's MJ?" Carrie recognized Aaron's voice and answered, "She's been sent to the States to be tried. I'm waiting to get permission to go visit her." "Oh, Aaron, I'm worried sick. What if they find her guilty?" "I know she's not. You know she's not. But that doesn't matter to them. They just want to look as though they're catching the bad guys." "Damn, Carrie, this sucks. It's not right. MJ is a lot of things, but terrorist is not one of them. She's a lovist, if anything. That's for sure. She's survived and forgiven more hurt and abuse in this lifetime than any person I've ever met. And she claims forgiveness for the sake of the giver, not the trespasser." "I know, love. She's an amazing person, all right. She thinks differently than so many of us. Sad irony is, this woman who has helped so many vulnerable people is being victimized by the bullies across the border." "Maybe you'd better watch what you say, Aaron. They took all the computers and memory storage devices out of the house, so they could very well be listening to us as we speak." "So be it. MJ is not a terrorist. She thinks outside the box. She challenges the status quo. She sets trends rather than following them, and she speaks up for the vulnerable and oppressed. But terrorist, she is not. Did you hear that the U.S. spy guys and girls? Did you hear that? I know that you know that, and everyone who knows MJ knows that, but the people down south have other ideas, and I pray to God that this lawyer she has can get her justice. Is there anything you need, Carrie? Do you need money? You know you can call me anytime. You must miss her." "There's nothing I need right now, but oh God, do I ever miss her. My heart aches for her locked up so far away from me. Oh yes, there's something you can do for me. When I get permission to go down and see her, will you come by and feed Socrates? Of course, that would be my pleasure. I bet he misses his mistress too, poor old bugger. Yes, I think so. He follows me around the house, looking curiously at me between sessions of licking his ass, he laughed. Aaron chuckled too. Chapter 20. HuffPost World. Japan hit by 7.3 magnitude earthquake off Fukushima Prefecture coast. Tsunami advisory issued. Japan's suicide rate soared up by 39% in areas hit by the earthquake. Teddy read the headlines on the front page of an outdated magazine left behind by someone who'd been at the table beside him in the coffee shop, and then studied the reflection of the overhead lights in his black tea. He watched as people came and went in the small town food court and squinted looking for the features of a familiar face. His world had changed at a pace that seemed to be almost overnight. He had played the part well of a stay home father for 16 years. Having less education than his wife, it was financially more feasible for her to be the breadwinner and him to be the parent and homemaker. Not long after his father's diagnosis of Huntington's disease, he and his siblings had genetic testing done to know if they were going to have the same fate as their dad. All three of them had the responsible gene. Soon symptoms began to show up in Ted's behavior. He was depressed, irritable, had problems focusing, recalling, or making decisions. Some days he was fine, others he was a stranger to his loved ones. It was just a matter of time before he would lose control of his muscles and coordination, eventually becoming physically permanently incapacitated. He knew that he didn't wish for his family to see what he saw as his dad deteriorated, so he chose to walk away from them. It had been a relief in some ways, as there were issues in his marriage for years. But moving out from under the roof of his family had some drawbacks. First of all, he was dependent on the government for income, therefore financially pressed to survive. Secondly, all he could afford to live in were attic-filled rooming houses. He had little to look forward to but this trip to the mall several times a week. He went to the counter of the McDonald's for his free refill and returned to study the second-hand laptop his son had bought at a pawn shop for him. Tugging at his white beard, he thought what right person had thought to get the draw card of free Wi-Fi into coffee shops. He watched the passengers descend from the buses outside the wall of windows around the food court, soon falling into the daydream about his going out party. He planned on sending gold embossed invitations to everyone he'd ever partied with to come to the last hurrah. He'd have the party powder ready to slip in the last drink he ever took that would be his release from the horrors that he'd seen his father quietly endure. He would invite musicians and dealers and everyone he knew who would appreciate a final boogie till you puke party. He'd often fantasized about becoming a Hell's Angel and believed that this would be a fitting farewell to even a Viking. He was immediately hooked when he came across a suicide message page on the net. There were thousands to choose from. He was sure of only one thing. He would be in control of his end, not modern medicine or the laws of the state. Chapter 21. Arlene turned her computer on and rooted through the butts in one of the overflowing ashtrays in her living room. She was waiting for her clothes to finish drying when she would travel down 4 floors to the basement laundry room and then reverse the climb with a basket of clothes. It was hard to believe that her 98-pound frame had survived over the last several months. It had all began when she'd seen a bug on her couch. She picked it off and killed it. She never thought about it again until a few days later she felt an itch on her cheek and she spotted another bug on her pillow. This one she placed in a clear bottle and called her building inspector to report the situation. The manager showed up with a pest control expert several days later and inspected her apartment. She was told to dispose of 60% of her possessions, launder everything she was keeping, and store it in steel bags. She was devastated. Initially, she defiantly resisted shedding her property. Finally, through fear of eviction from subsidized housing, she removed her bed, couch, and multiple boxes and bags of clothing, shoes, CDs, DVDs, bedding, family photo albums, books, and even more grandchildren's cherished christening gowns, baby clothes, toys that had been left behind or used when they visited. This situation was brought on her by sheer circumstance. She'd not bought used furniture or clothing into her home. She'd been in the laundry room the week before and met a tenant from the building next door who was telling the painful saga of finding bed bugs in her apartment, just as she grabbed the pile of dirty linen from the top of the dryer and placed it in an empty washer. That might have been the source, but the next door neighbors also had been infested. The creepies may have wandered over between the walls. There were multiple apartments in that building, as well as 3 surrounding ones that had been treated for the infestation. Arlene did what she was able to do to prepare for the exterminator. It was exhausting and heartbreaking. Although she had 4 children, some lived far away and others were caught up in their own survival dramas, so none of them showed up to give her a hand. Here was this tiny woman with only the assistance of a petite man who lived close by, struggled to remove a couple of tons of stuff down to the 3 or 4 floors of stairs into the garbage or up and down from the basement laundry room. Arlene had had a heart attack 6 years earlier and was taking medication to manage the damage done from that. She'd been struggling with an obsessive compulsive disorder for the last 3 years. She transferred some of this condition to scanning everything she touched, from the clothes she was about to wear to the bed she was about to lie in, for bed bugs or evidence of them. She hardly slept anymore from the stress of it all, so they sprayed. And then she held her breath as they inspected her place 2 weeks later, hoping to hear that they had got them. Bad news. She had to get rid of even more of her property. She was hysterical when she called her welfare worker to tell him that she was given a written notice that threatened eviction by next month if she didn't pay them the cost of spraying for the bed bugs. She cried in despair into the phone to her best friend. Where does she expect me to come up with that? I only get $510 a month. This woman was on the verge of homelessness. The situation that she found herself in would be miserable to a healthy, wealthy person, but for her, it was just too much. The day she wandered off her Facebook games and keyed in the word suicide was one of the happiest days she had for a while. Finally, a relief from the horror of throwing out her treasures, the clothes and miscellaneous items and furniture, including a bed and sofa that she'd never be able to afford to replace because of her ill health. She signed up under the code name Tired. She made a decision to end her misery by her own hand before Christmas. She purchased her equipment and had it stashed in her few remaining linens. She began to write a letter to her grand and great grandchildren to express her love for them and the great sadness she felt because they'd been torn from her bosom by their parents' addiction and mental illness and placed in the care of strangers as adoptees or foster kids. She'd lost so much of her life, including her firstborn, who had been placed immediately in the arms of the adoption agency at birth because she was but 14 years old. She tried to find him, but it never seemed to work out. She began marking off the days on the calendar. And that's the end for today. See you soon. Bye bye.